Thank you very much for joining us today to hear from Matthias Kaiser on food ethics and food research, the need for a paradigm shift. I'm Jenna Heller, your internal comms manager, and we're going to get started real shortly. It's just now 3 o'clock. I can see a bunch of people are joining, and I don't want to start too soon, so just bear with us another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. We'll be back with you in a minute. Okay, it's just after 3 o'clock. Thank you very much for taking time and making time in your day to hear from a guest speaker. I've got Stephen Goldson with us from Ag Research, and he's going to welcome you properly and introduce our speaker. Over to you, Stephen.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. My name is Stephen Goldson, as was just said, and I've been in ag research for a long time, and indeed in its predecessors, for many years as a pasture entomologist. And apart from a few diversions into management, my focus throughout has been on the science. I've seen many changes in the emphasis of science, in the science structure, changing objectives, and therefore I became particularly interested in our guest speakers' views about science and what science is for, and what may be wrong with the way we're doing science. So it's therefore my pleasure to introduce Matthias Kaiser. He's a professor at the Center for the Study of Science and Humanities in the University of Bergen, which is in Norway. I met him in the new Center for Informed Futures, led by Sir Peter Glutman, which looks at social issues, emerging issues around society and science. I'm an adjunct researcher there, which means I don't get paid, and things like that. But having met Matthias, I really realized pretty quickly that his interest in food ethics is very important for New Zealand, and he certainly views ethics in a different way from what I have been. And this has been interesting and challenging for me, at least, because I seem to have a completely opposite view to everything Matthias says, and I'll leave you to see what I mean. But I will leave it to Matthias now to talk to you. We're very lucky to have him. He's been trapped by the lockdown here far longer than he ever imagined he would be. So that's worked to our advantage. So thank you, Matthias, very much.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. And hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here online. I would prefer to have you in a room and speak to you in a room, but I think we'll make that work somehow. We have to get used to this, I think, in these times of pandemics and what have you. And I don't want to bother you with a lot of my background and interests and all of that. There is certainly somewhere there's a CV of myself. Never mind. I will go right to the topic of my talk, and I will now try to share. Let me see if that works. You should now see a slide that has the title of the talk, food ethics.
Not yet. I need you to share your content again, please. Sorry, just didn't come through.
It didn't come through. I'll do that again.
That's looking better. Yep, you can go ahead and continue.
Okay, I'll do that then. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present some criticism of what I see is not going the right way and how we do food research nowadays. and going to present some rough ideas, mostly just for discussion. One of the things that has always been, mind-blowing to me is that it's like this elephant in the room, that a lot of people seem to know that something may be seriously wrong, or something that we are missing a target, and still it can continue, like, the elephant in the room that nobody dares to talk about. So and that happens a lot in research, in particular when it comes to issues that are of the big societal interest, where people have very narrow perspectives on them. And that means also that people have different viewpoints, and that is one of the issues that I think should be reflected much more in our research. Now, let me be a little bit more specific. We have now a much more advanced view on the food system. What we in former days viewed as a very simple linear system, from production via middlemen and processing, retailers to consumers, we see now as an integrated system that integrates and interacts with a lot of other systems, with politics, with health, environment, society, and economy. And we see how this comes in all the way. And I will claim that these issues add value perspectives on the way, but I come back to that. So, and what we also see is that just recently, even before pandemics, there have been a lot of assessments of the global food system, and all of them seem to agree that change is needed. Some say there is, radical change is needed, and you can see this both when it comes to agriculture and when it comes to seafood, or that is fisheries and aquaculture. And here's just a picture of some of them. I recommend, if you haven't seen that one, the Sustainable Food System for the European Union from SAPEA, which came out this year, which I think is one of the better actually reports on that. I will come back to the Eat Lancet report in a minute. This is it here. And this is one of those reports that got a lot of headlines. It came out in 2019, and it is basically a report that says, hey, we have to change our diet, and we need to combine nutritional issues with, and health issues with environmental issues, sustainable production and healthy food. And it makes a lot of recommendations. Now, the intentions are certainly good in a report like that, but I still have a lot of difficulties with this report, but not only with this, but this is an example of so many other reports. And I can tell you what my difficulties are just briefly. First of all, it is not populated by real people. They only talk about consumers in a very abstract sense. It ignores any cultural embeddedness, that there are a lot, we are talking about a global report, that we have a lot of cultural differences. It ignores social functions of food. What do we use food for in our social life? It is also culturally biased towards the more affluent Western world and societies, and ignoring what we call the global South. It ignores context and realities of the primary producers, even, the farmers or the fishermen in various parts of the world, and ignores the obstacles to behavior change, because they argue for a change, but why is it that we don't easily change our behavior? Anyway, this is one of the difficulties. The other is that I feel that the science is compromised when political claims interfere. Like, they make an easy claim here that if we would follow their recipe, we would easily save 11 million lives per year if this is followed. Now, you have to look at the details of it and look at how the models that go into that. And my problem is that I don't think these are really reliable, very robust models that we can use to give us any precise numbers. There are guessworks. So and there I feel it's a misuse of scientific method for political purposes. And then, what it is in the similar line, it operates with precisely quantified nutritional targets. And here's just one example. That is, for the whole grains, it says there's a maximum intake per day of 232 grams, and that would be 811 kilocalories per day. Now, and there's a whole range of all of these, inputs and ranges what we should eat. Now, I think the numbers here are giving again an impression of high precision, where the science behind it is in a very large degree characterized by very high uncertainties. That is, all kind of nutritional science is really having this problem of basic uncertainties. And there are studies, for example, by, here I have some references, Brown and Ioannidis, and others, that look at some of these relationships, for example, between diet intake or diet and cancer. And basically they say if these statistics are right, in theory we could eradicate cancer by just changing any of those, just one of the ingredients, and either double it or half it per day, and we would eradicate cancer worldwide, which is obviously a very counterintuitive recommendation, but it shows the weakness of these statistical or these studies that are satisfied with just statistical significance. And there are others that show that. So here's again this issue about hyper precision on very uncertain grounds. And the final thing that I want to just propose here is that it proposes top-down global solutions as some kind of a silver bullet. It even has what they call a strategy, which is not much of a strategy, rather than actually promoting local adaptivity and resilience. And that is maybe a more philosophical issue I have with the whole kind of this report and other reports, that they believe there is some kind of a silver bullet that is a one size fits all to adapt to sustainable diets and sustainable food production. I think this is basically wrong. I think we need to start on the local level and with local participation, and have to find our ways out that is adaptive and resilient. So, and if you add to that, what is also typical issue in these studies is that they have a lot of composite indicators. Here's just one study about the ecological footprint. You can have similar global indicators about, multiple dimensional poverty index and global health security and so on. And as you can see in this picture is, it's largely getting together things that are not equal in all areas, where the information is hidden in the sub areas, but not in the global composite indicator. So this is another issue that we need to just be aware of is the framing of the problem. And what we see is many of these issues start out with framing a problem so that a particular science, let that be economics or other studies, can have an answer. So this is what we call the type 3 error. That is very good science, but unfortunately altogether the wrong problem. That is, it is not the problem that is really bothering the actors out there, the stakeholders, but it's a problem that comes out of the scientific dynamic. So, and finally, and this is now for me a very important point, is they deal as if it's only a matter of sustainability, and they neglect that all these discussions have an underlying issues of values and ethics. So my definition of food ethics is actually, it's an empirical study and it's a normative reflection of what I call pro-social attitudes and value trade-offs pertaining to all kinds of food, that is terrestrial, aquatic, and so on, and held by various stakeholders and citizens all along the global value chain in an integrated food system. In other words, this relates to our farmer somewhere in whatever, the fish farmer in Bangladesh, to the retailer that sells the food, and to the consumer, and all of them having to make choices between different kinds of values, and the values being basically their visions of what is good for a good life. So this is my vision of food ethics, and there's different values. There's economic values, obviously. There's societal value, like landscape integrity and diversity. There's work opportunities and all of that. There is human value in terms of food safety and food security. There's an ecological value that comes in, for example, with this, about the soil or about wildlife. And there is ethical value in terms of respect for nature. And I have a picture from Norwegian aquaculture, which for us is an important issue. Or here this is the Sami people with the reindeer, respect for indigenous traditions. And finally, animal welfare, or the use of forced labor in a lot of these production areas. So, and all of these things, in my mind, should be studied in a transdisciplinary manner. That is actually in a way where it is the question that is out there in society that guides us in our research, rather than what we come in with in our different disciplines and regard this as a scientific framing. So this is, I think, one of the things. Now, let me just, and this is my final slide, basically. I share this opinion with many reports that business as usual is no longer a viable option and radical change is required. So that is why I say we probably need a new paradigm. And that should be, first of all, transdisciplinary. So it is going out in a much wider, in a broader framework than we had so far. Also, it should be cross-sectoral and integrated for all kinds of food. Our crop production is, or animal production is very much dependent on feed, which is again very dependent on fisheries, for example, and aquaculture again is the same issue. So it's about all of the food, and it should be, and this is what I said about the ethics, explicit about values and uncertainties in our analysis, not just assuming them as given, but actually studying them, see what are those values that the stakeholders do. And this is basically face values and ethics up front, not just as an addendum as is often done in research. And economic analysis should be always expanded by a social cultural analysis, which follows from these focus on different value systems. It also would mean that we put a prior on humans and human choices and preferences. That is, we need to see what are our visions, our food futures that we want to, have realized. And to do this, we need to put a prior on local objectives. That is, the best sustainable local fit, and be informed, but not necessarily constrained by global analyses like, from the FAO, or in this case, the Eat Lances report. It can inform us, but it shouldn't restrain us. We need to start from the bottom, from the local issues and our local consumers, our local producers. And I would also say that very often we probably need to be bold enough to prefer robust, soft, and that is qualitative insights to highly speculative, hard quantitative insights. This is my criticism when it comes to nutritional studies like that. They pretend to give hard numbers where actually the basis for them is very soft. In that case, I would rather have soft qualitative insights than these numbers. And finally, we should co-construct these objectives and strategies with all stakeholders and citizens, because it's a societal thing. It's not only a thing that applies to certain sectors of society, but it's something that basically defines our future in society. And with that, I better stop. I'm already a little bit over time. I'm afraid of that. So thank you for your very kind attention. And back to Stephen or Jenna, I'm not sure.
I'll jump in real quickly. And Matthias, I want you to tell us what that last slide was. What was that fish?
He's turned his mic off as we were told to do.
Oh, I thought he still had his mic on. We will open up for some questions if anybody has any questions. But Stephen, perhaps you could get us started maybe with a question of your own, because I don't see any coming in at the moment.
Well, it's more a comment, but it's very refreshing to hear from someone who did a degree in mathematics and philosophy and then got into science from that direction rather than from the kind of creeping along type of career that I've had. And I don't know if he can hear, but I'd like to know how he came to get involved in science and how he was able to develop this critical kind of view of science and what his impression is of the funding system.
So, okay, can you hear me, folks? I hope so. My microphone is...
Yep, we can.
Okay, good. Just briefly, I mean, my interest in science goes long time. It goes back, and it was a long time for the natural sciences, but it really started to get intensified when I studied the emergence of aquaculture in Norway. And, you know, we are the largest producer of salmon in the world. And in the early 90s, we did a study on that. And particularly, we were looking backwards in time, how this was assessed scientifically. And what it turned out was that science was all wrong. All the scientific predictions were all wrong about it. And actually, there was a lot of practical knowledge that one didn't use, for example, from farmers, from agriculture, that could have helped, for example, aquaculture in developing. So, and then I saw this relationship between, you know, science for policy and science and society as very much related to value questions and also power questions. And ever since then, I have this very specific interest in these issues. I also want to say about funding. I know that we have, in most countries, still a very conservative funding system that is very narrow, that funds you for publications in very narrow journals and all of that. In spite of what they are always now talking about, they talk about impact, you know, but they don't necessarily prepare the ground for actually collaboration that is between different disciplines and with a broad variety of stakeholders. I think that is needed, but I think science policy is on the way to understand that, and we are getting some schemes that will help us on that way. At least in Norway, we are starting with it. Hopefully it will improve.
Can I just please ask you to explain what this transdisciplinary thing is? We're used to multidisciplinary. This is a new word for some of us. And although people have explained it to me twice, I need to ask again, what is it?
Very good, Stephen. And I would encourage you to be always skeptical about jargon. There is too much jargon around. And I'm always a little bit skeptical about myself when I use that term. However, there are some slight differences. Multidisciplinarity is basically still used when you have an issue and you say, okay, we put a chemist and a biologist to work on that issue. And both of them work from their own perspective, right? But they work in parallel, not necessarily together. Now, the interdisciplinary would say that, okay, we have an issue here, but maybe they should work together because it doesn't help us if we have, you know, all segregated results. We want one basic issue. Let's the chemist and the biologist work together, and maybe they can come up with a united method how to study this thing or something like that, right? But again, the problem framing starts from the perspectives of the chemistry and the biology. That is the interdisciplinarity, right? Now, in the transdisciplinarity, it is different. You start the problem framing from outside the sciences. That is, you start the problem framing as, for example, a politician would have it. You know, oh, what is the reform that we need for agricultural policy? Or you start from the problem framing that consumers would have, you know, that, oh, we don't trust our food anymore. How can I be sure I give my children the right food, right? And that is defining your problem framing. And then you put all kinds of people together and you say then, hey, you guys, you put your heads together and talk to these people, and maybe you can develop a good way to go about solving it, right? So that would be, I think, the characteristic of a transdisciplinary approach.
That's great. Thanks, Matthias. We've got a few questions coming in now. I'm wondering, can you give an example of how to seek out and then juggle the different values and ethics of those different perspectives, and how that might change the focus of food research? How do you seek out and juggle them in order to, Yeah,
I have done so much in agriculture research, but I did quite a bit on aquaculture, and particularly different Asian countries. And because our assumption was that maybe Asian countries would be very different from the Western countries in the, that's what I call the value landscapes. And so there we had a more advanced way to go about it. And actually it turned out we had in 4 countries, we had, you know, surveys and activities with stakeholders, in each country 500 or so of them, and in the local language and all of this. And it was Bangladesh, China, Vietnam, and Thailand. And what came out was, first of all the stakeholders were most engaged in the ethical issues, much more than any technical issues, and there were communities discussing them for days. Secondly, what came out was the value landscapes. We asked them to rank different values and all of that. The value landscapes came out very different. The biggest difference was between China and Bangladesh, right? And actually surprisingly different, because you would expect that the poorest country, in this case Bangladesh, would put the most weight on, for example, economic welfare and all of that, or well-being. No, they didn't. They had much more ecological well-being in their values than the Chinese. Anyway, and then we had all kinds of other studies following that up. In the end, it was reflected in workshops on their particular envisioned future scenarios for aquaculture, you know, and we asked them to relate the development of their work to these values. And anyway, the point is not that we did the only thing that is to be done, no, but the point is you can do something about it. Once you open up to that, there are methods to make that visible, to, you know, have these discussions. And actually these are discussions that users, producers, consumers actually appreciate highly, much more often than the purely technical discussions.
Thank you for that discussion, Matthias. We've got a couple other questions. We're coming up to the end of our time. Have you got a couple more minutes? Maybe we could talk through, you could answer these questions, and we'll make this video available on Gateway later in the day for those people who do need to go. Is that okay with you, Matthias?
Perfectly okay. I'm around here. Oh yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So the next question that people are quite interested in is, how should science approach food production trends that come as a privileged consumer demand, but with no scientific background or evidence? How should science approach food production trends that come maybe from a privileged consumer demand, but with no scientific background or evidence?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the background is for that particular question. I expect that it may be something that goes into the direction of, for example, organic products or other kind of products that have a special whatever label to them, and that is not necessarily you know, having all the scientific backing that one would normally expect. I think one should take these very seriously. On the other hand, this is now a very subjective opinion. I feel our food industry is very quick in reacting to market trends from very privileged consumer groups. It is not so quick in actually reacting to consumer needs that come from groups that are not so privileged, and that is, of course, you know, maybe not so much the case in New Zealand, but it is very much the case in many other countries, particularly in the global south. So, and I think we need also scientists sometimes as advocates. That is, you know, to speak out here and to say, hey, we are putting our money on the wrong horse here. We should also do more on this or that, even though other things are more trendy, are more, you know, voiced by very powerful social groups. But well, again, this is hard to say in general, but I think scientists should be maybe much more also a part of the public discourse on food in general.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We've got a few people who are interested in your view on the circular bioeconomy. The term is widely used, but seldomly fully understood, and people are quite keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. The circular bioeconomy is a theoretical construct, I think. I mean, one has to be honest about it. It's not anything that we right now know how to put into life, nothing like that. It has, however, just from this theoretical construct, there follow a number of issues. One of the issues is, for example, has to do with the food waste, you know. I mean, what we have nowadays is that there's a lot of food waste, and I don't know your numbers here. In Europe, I think every consumer is about, we throw away 90 kilos of food every year in Europe on average. Anyway, so that is one of the clear issues. We need to have more smart eating. We need to have eating that is utilizing different input sources, also high and low in the food web, and very often in the seafood, for example, much lower than we do nowadays. And the circular economy would basically imply that we take care of utilizing all the byproducts that do not go into direct consumption. And we are still far away from that, but I think it is a useful heuristic, and as such, I think it should be seen, but not more than that yet.
Thank you. Final question before we wrap up today. Have you got any tips for encouraging transdisciplinary research? The comment made here is that we're trying to do this here at Ag Research, but it's extremely difficult to achieve true transdisciplinary research. Even interdisciplinary work is challenging. Yes,
I totally agree. I mean, and Peter Gluckman and I, we have been engaged in each of our universities. I'm in Bergen and he here. And one of the issues that we try to say, we try to convey to them is this is also a matter of leadership, right? Because I think there are many more people who would participate if they were given the opportunity to do that. And that means that we would need some kind of a regular platform where people can get together from very different faculties, you know, where actually if you are a chemist, that you could meet a, I don't know, a historian or an economist, and then discuss these issues on climate change and food, for example, or whatever. And explore what are the commonalities, what are our common interests, and can we learn from each other, and how do these relate to what we believe, you know, the people out there in society are really, you know, having trouble with. So yes, we should have more of these fora, but my plea is always that don't wait for the top leadership to implement these fora. If you can do this on a local level, do it locally, where you are, in your environment. Invite other people, invite those people that you normally would never expect to come to these meetings. One of the positive examples I had when after our study on the fish farming, we were offered actually money by the industry to do this on an international basis, and we had a conference. And I insisted that we should invite people that we would normally not think about. So we had different people from different fields. And as it turned out, those talks from these people on aquaculture, on the fish farming, were those talks that were the biggest success of the whole conference, because people thought, oh, all of a sudden, you know, they got me thinking. And we engaged in new dialogues. It was a moving factor in the whole discussion. So just be courageous enough and invite voices that you don't know if they will participate, if they will contribute, but just dare it and do it on your local level. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Excellent advice. Thank you. Stephen, I wondered if you'd like to wrap up. I can say from a comms point of view, thank you very much, Matthias. This is the first time we've brought someone in from outside of ag research and used this particular platform, and yeah, it's been great. Stephen.
Matthias, thank you very much. That was great, and it's great you've met Mothership Ag Research, and they likewise have met you. And it's very timely, because I think the tendrils of this COVID thing are going to be around for a long time. Yes. And I think, given the uncertainty and change, many of your points are very timely. Having talked to you quite a bit, actually, it's made me realize that the science community has a voice, a different voice from that which may have been heard before. It should have an influence, or can have an influence, on setting strategies. And I believe that the sort of ideas you put forward should be presented to the funders as well. I mean, I think that much of what you say is not recognized easily until it's pointed out. So on behalf of us all, thank you very much, Matthias. And I'll see you in an hour at Virtual Drinks, which is reasonably unrewarding, but we'll see you then. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.